Hi, I'm Ollie from Source Investments, and for the last 10 years, we've been helping investors grow and protect their wealth through property. Today, I want to talk about the Wynn Casino, or the Wynn Effect has been called. And to do this, I want to reference Marina Bay Sands in Singapore and look at the impact that it had on the surrounding area since it opened in 2010. What is the Wynn Effect? Well, Wynn Resort has a very strong track record for transforming destinations. It first opened in Las Vegas, and then it very quickly opened within a year in Macau, and it was one of the first US casino operators to do so. And very quickly, it became associated with high-end luxury offerings, and it's had a significant impact on Macau's gaming and tourism landscape. Why is this important today? Why is it relevant? Well, it's possible that we are about to experience the Wynn effect in an even bigger way in Ras Al Khaimah, where Wynn has been granted the UAE's first ever commercial gaming license, meaning it will be the only casino open in the UAE in 2027. This video is about the effects that this is likely to have and actually what is already happening in the surrounding area in terms of property prices. In order to understand what this trajectory might look like, I think it's really useful to use real life historical examples, which is what brings me on to talking about Marina Bay Sands. I might refer to Marina Bay Sands as MBS throughout this video rather than saying the full name every time. MBS is one of Singapore's most iconic developments. It holds significant economic, architectural, social and political importance throughout Singapore. It's one of only two casinos there. It opened in 2010, the same year actually as the other legalized casino, which was Resorts World Sentosa. And I think the status that MBS holds in Singapore and what it has now evolved into could reflect what we're about to see with the Wynn Casino in the UAE. MBS is referred to as an integrated resort, meaning it's not just a casino. It also has a luxury hotel attached to it, as well as various restaurants, fine dining, bars, spa facilities, high-end shopping, theaters, entertainment venues, exhibition centers. It has everything, which is why it attracts people from all around the world for tourism, but also for business. So it's both business and pleasure. And that is essentially exactly what the Wynn are building. It's also going to be an integrated resort. Marina Bay Sands has been a huge revenue generator, bringing in revenue from tourism and various other business activities. But then it also creates tens of thousands of jobs in construction, hospitality, and operations. I think one of the biggest things to focus in on was the shift in the conservative stance from the Singapore government. Traditionally, gambling was frowned upon, casinos weren't legal. So to have such a big shift was huge for Singapore. And I guess the question is, why did they do this? Well, a very large driver here was to boost tourism and ultimately diversify the economy and stay competitive in the global hospitality and entertainment industry. It was very much a strategic move that hugely benefited the local economy. What was the impact in terms of property prices and values? Well, I'm going to come on to that, talking about where values were both before and MBS opened to the public. It opened in 2010, but off-plan sales in the surrounding area actually started much before this, in and around sort of 2004, 2005. And to use a live example of back then, you can look at one of the residential developments called The Sale in Marina Bay. And when off-plan sales started there in 2005, pricing was around 900 to 1,200 Singapore dollars per square foot. And then after that was announced, over the next 3 years, they rallied all the way up to 2,000 Singapore dollars per square foot. Then you had Marina Bay Residences that launched in 2006. It sold as high as 2,400 Singapore dollars per square foot, and it broke all previous records. 90% of the units were sold in a single day on launch day. Then, obviously in 2008, the global financial crisis hit. Everyone's very aware of that, it can't be ignored. There was a dip in property values by as much about 20 to 30%. But then what's interesting is between 2009 and 2010, prices rebounded very sharply, gaining about 65%, getting back to previous levels and actually going on and rallying further. Now, after Marina Bay Sands opened, what happened is prices sort of stabilized and leveled off. But I think that's good to know, because I think one might expect is that prices started to sort of tail off and come down, but that actually wasn't the case. They stayed stable, but then they grew at a much more gradual pace over the years. Now, looking at some key points from this, fairly obviously, the largest gains were made by the early investors. Between sort of 2004 to 2007, that's where we saw the biggest move in property values, which I think doesn't come as a surprise. Obviously, going in first, generally there's higher risk there, but then that, if it pays off, often comes with a higher reward. So that was very much the case in the case of the Sale and Marina Bay residences. If we look at average prices in the Sale that got up to around sort of 2,200 at their high Singapore dollars per square foot in 2010, over the next 10 years, they increased to around 2,600 to 2,700 Singapore dollars per square foot. And they have continued to climb from there. So I do think that's quite reassuring, actually seeing that gradual growth afterwards. And then if we look at Marina Bay residences, they went from around 1,800 Singapore dollars a foot when first launched to about 2,400 by completion. And then looking at data today, premium units can go for as much as over 3,000 Singapore dollars a foot. Why is this all relevant? Well, the Wynn Casino is opening on Al Marjan Island in 2027. And I'll get into pricing in a moment in terms of where pricing was pre-Wynn announcement to where they are now. But also, before coming on to that, I think it's important just to recognize, whilst there are similarities between Wynn and MBS in terms of a shift in stance towards gambling and being the first to open in a region, there are also some differences that I think are worth pointing out. Marina Bay Sands was part of a much wider national policy shift, legalizing gambling throughout Singapore. And it was one of two resorts to benefit from this, alongside what I mentioned earlier, Resorts World Sentosa. Whereas when we're looking at the Wynn, the gaming license that has been granted there is just to one emirate, Ras Al Khaimah, rather than something that has been granted or decided or legalized across the whole UAE. And I think you can view that as both a positive and a negative, really. I personally would argue that that is probably more weighted towards the positive in terms of Wynn having a significant first mover advantage. But you could also argue that it comes with increased risk, in terms of regulatory and legal uncertainty, given that it's not a UAE-wide precedent. And so if the broader UAE government were to intervene, this could potentially cause issues. But I just think it's very difficult to comprehend that this hasn't already been thought and talked about with Wynn, who've just invested $5 billion US dollars. Those are things to bear in mind. Higher risk often does come with higher reward. But I think the amount of sales that have taken place in the region and what's happening there now, it is becoming more and more de-risked every day. Yeah, ultimately, the UAE is testing the water with legalized gambling. And I think whatever comes further down the line, and I think it'd be naive to think that if it's hugely successful, we won't potentially see more. I think, Wynn is going to be so significantly ahead of the others. I read an article in Forbes talking about it's probably a 5-year head start on anyone else that comes into the region. So it's got a significant head start. Now, coming on to pricing, looking at Al Marjan and looking at beachfronted property, that's where a lot of our focus has been and where investors' focus should be. If you're going into these regions, if you're going into these areas, targeting the more premium opportunities is certainly where we would look. So looking at beachfronted property on Al Marjan, that today is anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 dirhams per square foot. So already prices have probably doubled from where they were pre-announcement. You're already seeing that big move starting to happen. And then actually, if we look at some nearby projects, so we've done quite a lot of work, and I've done a few videos on Shoba's project on Siniya Island, as well as actually another project that was recently launched in downtown Al Quwain. Both of those projects, particularly Siniya, is definitely going to be benefiting from the Wynn. I think if you're looking at that private island community, you can get over to Al Marjan on a boat. There's going to be regular shuttle services that take 8 minutes on a boat. There's just no way it can't really benefit by having that private island feel while still being in very close proximity with Al Marjan. And looking at where prices are now, well, when that project was first launched, they were at about 2,100 dirhams per square foot. Right now, beachfronted or sea view units are anywhere from about 2,800 per square foot. So we've already seen a pretty significant move, but I think there is definitely more room for growth. We're about 65% sold through that project. So I definitely think there's still runway for growth, and particularly now as it's become a bit more de-risked versus investors investors who were getting in 6-7 months ago. And then actually, if we go a little bit further south onto mainland downtown Al Quwain, we're now looking at beachfronted property there around sort of 2,000 dirhams per square foot. So you can sort of see that room for growth over the long term if you're looking at where Siniya's gone, where Ras Al Khaimah's already gone. And then actually, if you start sort of going inland at Ras Al Khaimah, you're seeing growth there as well. And there is some opportunities there. If you're looking at more inland opportunities versus sea view, well, you can probably be getting in there around sort of 1,800, maybe actually as low as about 1,500 dirhams per square foot. And I think the thing that you've got to remember when you look at this pricing, the movement that's already taken place and where it could go, is just refer back to Dubai. You know, Dubai is 45, 50 minutes away in a car. And when you're looking at this sort of pricing, which I've spoken about quite a bit in my other previous videos, beachfronted property, if you're looking at Palm Jumeirah, Palm Jebel Ali, I mean, you're 2-3 times these prices and more. So I think it's definitely a really exciting opportunity. And I think looking at what's going to happen as the Wynn Casino gets closer to completion and attracts more and more media attention, I think everything that was seen previously with Marina Bay Sands, I think this has got even more scope for where this could go. So thanks very much for watching this video. I'll be putting a few links below to some previous videos that give a bit more background info in terms of the other projects that I mentioned. And if you've got any questions, then please do feel free to get in touch with us at Source Investments, and a member of the team will be able to help with any questions. Thanks very much.